Hey, welcome back to another edition of Fire Engineering's Tactical Impact. I'm your host, Jim Silvernail. With me is my co-host, Chief Jason Hovelman. Jason, it's great to see you again. I know we're in the same area, but it's always good to see your face on tape here. How are you?
Good. It's always good to be back on, do a show, talk about tactics.
That's right. We're here to talk about tactics and to highlight some articles out of our magazine, Fire Engineering. Also talk about some of our classes at FDIC. But today we have we won't disappoint. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to highlight an article out of June 2025 on basement fires. And I think it's phenomenal article. I got done reading it just earlier last week, and man, it really hit home for me. Jason, how about you?
Yeah, for sure. I thought it was an outstanding article, and it starts out, and we'll let Dan explain a little bit, but and we understand not every part of the country has basements or cellars, as Dan will talk about in his article, but definitely the most challenging fires I've been on have been these lower level, sub-level fires that are difficult to get to. And so I thought the article was absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, it definitely a challenge. It's a fire that nobody really wants to go to. They're challenging. You're going to feel a lot of heat, but there's ways to combat them. As we know, there's been a lot of research out there. In fact, just last month, in our area, we had a mayday from a basement fire, 2 jurisdictions over that our companies were on. I really don't want to talk about it because I wasn't there, but I talked to a couple captains there, and some hairy details that I'm sure Dan's going to get into. But without further delay, why don't you introduce our guest, sir?
Yeah, so we're really happy and thankful to have Dan Gordon on with us from FDNY. And again, this is in the June issue of Fire Engineering, and it's on page 48. It's in the basement. And Dan, I'll let you give a little bio about yourself and talk about your experience and where you work and what moved you to write the article, and we'll jump into the content. And thanks so much for joining us.
Cool. Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. My name is Dan Gordon. I'm a lieutenant in New York City. I work in Ladder 2 right now in Midtown. So a little ironic that I'm writing a basement fire article where most of my fires are up in the air. But I worked in the Bronx for 12 years before I got promoted, both in Ladder 47 and Squad 61. And I do training on the side as well. And so a lot of the lessons that we've learned, both from studies, line of duty deaths, reading, and obviously real incidents, as well as in the teaching world, kind of all came together for the precipice of this article. And it's not a tactical article. And that's one of the big things. You could look at all of the debates in the fire service, smoothbore fog, mid-mount, rear mount. And I don't really get into how to fight a basement fire. It's just about recognizing that it's in that basement. And the title of the article really comes from a fire that I went to. I might have been a probie. I might have had a year on the job. And, everything's just kind of happening around you and you're trying to take it in as much as possible. And walked up. It came in as a second floor fire. There's a 3-story attached on both sides, which I'll get to in a little bit. So masking up at the front door, going in, ready to go up and put the fire out. And I remember the 2 bosses, the engine boss and the truck boss, both had a good amount of time, probably over 20 years at the time, looked at each other and said, "It's in the basement." And I didn't even know what they meant right away. Like, what are you talking about? And it ended up being a basement fire. We all got superficial burns, because they were hot. There wasn't any vent area. And it just, we could have gone up to the second floor and been in a world of hurt, or the first floor and been in a world of hurt. But these guys knew. And I promise you, they were not looking at flow path. They were not looking at unidirectional flow, bidirectional. They wouldn't even know what those terms were. But they just knew through their experience that, hey, something's not right here. It's in the basement. And so this article is all about just trying to get guys and gals to recognize, hey, it's not where the fire, it's in the basement. And then we can have the debate of how are we going to attack it. But it's in the basement.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I thought was so great about the article is it's before we can attack the fire, we've got to be able to identify it, and it goes back to those tactical objectives, right? Locate and confine, and all life, locate, confine, all of those things. Kind of get into the importance of the size up as you describe it in the article, and some of the challenges that you've seen and that you list in there that people need to pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, we'll go with the most common one, what you see from the front, right? And that's a huge piece of the puzzle. But just because I see it from the front doesn't mean that that's what's going on in the rear or the sides. And you can say we'll pull past the structure, get three sides. Well, there might be trees in the way. There might be objects in the way that you might not be able to see. And smoke and fire are going to take the path of least resistance. So you may see smoke showing, you may not see smoke showing, but that may not be the origin of where that smoke is. If somebody, exits their house, leaves the front door open, you may see smoke coming out the front door and assume, hey, first floor fire. But if everything else is closed up nice and tight, well, the smoke's going to take the path of least resistance out that front door. And so it's going to require a more robust size up than just what you see from the rig. Talk about 360. I hate the always is and nevers in the fire service. And I just kind of mentioned it. An attached building. And yes, I understand that this is probably more of an urban, suburban style where, you're going to have attached structures, but you may not get a 360, at least initially. And so it's incumbent on you to have other clues of what's going on. As I said, this was attached on both sides. A 360 was not going to happen right away. And quite frankly, that the view of the rear probably came from the roof firefighter before anybody else. And so, flat roof structure. So the aerial goes to the roof, they get up to the roof, they can peek over the rear and see what's going on. And so, the 360 has to be done if you have access to the sides and the rear. I'm not proposing that, we just run in the front door. But the 360 also sometimes we have to accept is not going to be able to get done. And so what are the other clues? So the thermal imaging camera, can help potentially, but there's a lot of avenues where it could lead us up for failure as well. And so just making sure that, again, all of the clues come into play, all the pieces of the puzzle we put together and not rely on any one thing. In terms of, let's say, our standard private dwelling, we can do a 360 on. So one of the things that I talk about in the article is that a lot of these fires, and I don't have specific statistics on it, but a lot of our fires are going to start in the HVAC equipment, boilers, heating units, whatever the case may be. And many of the times, not all, but many of the times, those are in enclosed rooms that may or may not have windows. And so now we're taking all of the things we know about fire dynamics, putting it in an enclosed room, sometimes not even on the exterior side of the structure. And if we have a tightly enclosed basement, we may not get any smoke showing at all from that area. So I may do my 360, say, hey, I don't see any smoke showing. I have an odor. I know I have, a working fire, and then end my 360 at that front door, open the front door, and now have that different smoke layering that we talked about in the article, and have to now re-gear our size up. So I want to talk about the 360. That's pretty obvious what we're looking for. Now, if I do my 360, I have in the two different types of basements that we may run into would be something like a Bilko door or a walkout basement, right? In a walkout basement, I think it's been pretty well proven that if we have a fire in a walkout basement, the best way to attack it most of the time is going to be taking that line around the rear and bringing it in through the walkout basement. If we can attack a fire on grade level, that's going to be the most efficient way. Now, that said, just because I've done my 360 and I say, hey, here's my walkout basement, I'm going to attack it on that level and bring my line around the rear. Our 360, and I remember I said I don't like to use the words always or musts. I think our 360 must end at that front door. Open up that front door make sure there's no victims inside there. Remember, victims are going to use their path of regular access and egress. And so while we need to put the fire out around the rear, probably in that case, I want to make sure there's not somebody that maybe we're overcome right inside that front door. We may also have fire on the first floor also. It's not that, and that's one of the issues with, as much as I talk about it, that's one of the big issues with relying on that bidirectional or unidirectional flow, is that we can have fire in the basement and on the first floor. And now I would probably have bidirectional flow on that first floor also. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. But I think the gist is do a 360, but even that may not tell us everything, and you may need to get eyes into that basement area. There's been line of duty, and one of the big things, with it's in the basement is making sure that we're not stretching into that first floor. And I don't want to say not stretching into that first floor when there's a basement fire, because there are many times that we do that, but not stretching into the first floor where there's a basement fire that we don't know about, right? And you can look at multiple line of duty deaths where we did not know there was a basement fire, and that basement fire caused a structural catastrophic collapse of the area the firefighters were operating in and essentially killed them. So
I like, you hit in the article about some size up tricks of the trade, and the front door is so critical, and I like how you put the third rule in there. Kind of talk about that, the rule of thirds.
Yeah. So as I said, my size ups has to end with that front door or start with the front door. But after the 360, we're going to pop open that front door, whether we have to force it or we're able to simply open it up. And we're doing that for a few reasons. As I said, we got to see if there's victims inside there that went down. And now initially, when I open up that front door, I'm expecting smoke to come out, right? And I am expecting smoke to come out essentially floor to ceiling 100% of the way. And that's just because fire is a high pressure event. Fire, and we know that fire, I say these days, but we're probably going back 25 years now, is burning some of the worst fuels that we can imagine. Homes are very well sealed up now. And so we're going to have a lot of smoke inside of that structure, regardless of where the fire is located. So I'm expecting smoke to come out essentially floor to ceiling when I open up that door, because it's overpressurized in there. Once that pressure equalizes out, now I can use what's kind of dubbed the rule of thirds. And I did not make this up. I've taken this from people that have taught it before. But the rule of thirds, right? So kind of break that doorway into thirds, the top third, the center third, and the bottom third. And I want to find, and I'm not radioing this on the radio, I'm not saying this out loud, but I want to find that neutral plane, the neutral plane where the equalization of the exhaust coming out and the air coming in. And I want to find that neutral plane. If there is no neutral plane and it's 100% of an intake, meaning I open up that front door, maybe I get some smoke out, maybe I don't, and now there is no smoke coming out of that front door, that's a very good indication that the fire is located on a level above me, right? Because that doorway is now 100% of an intake, and somewhere in that structure above me is an exhaust. So think about a fireplace, right? A properly operating fireplace is 100% of an intake, and you have the exhaust above you, right? When the other scenario, I open up that door, maybe get some smoke, and now my neutral plane is somewhere in that top third. I probably have also a fire above me, but in this case, I may not have any exhaust area above me, right? And so the smoke, as it over pressurizes above, there is going to be some smoke coming out of that front door above me. But the neutral plane is really, really high, indicating to me, again, most likely that fire is above me. If I open up that front door, I get good smoke coming out, and then it equalizes, and my neutral plane is somewhere in that center third, the fire is likely located on that level, right? Because my top part is the exhaust coming out, and the bottom third is, the bottom third is going to be my inlet of the air coming in towards the fire. So what's some things to think about that? I aim my thermal imaging camera, and then I'll go into the bottom third, but I aim my thermal imaging camera up at the ceiling. I should be able to see those convecting heat waves coming out, and that can guide me towards the fire. If I don't have a camera, if my camera is struggling to keep up, if I aim my flashlight down at the floor, I can see that air being drawn in towards the fire. Again, towards the fire. If my goal is to find the fire, all I might need is a flashlight at the lower level to start guiding me towards that fire for a fire on that level. The third scenario, I open up that door, I get a lot of smoke out, and it's mostly an exhaust, but maybe at the bottom third, I have a little bit of an inlet coming in. That's telling me that likely it's a basement fire. But beyond that, where is the fire getting its air? Fire's lazy but powerful. It's grabbing the air from that front door, which means that, again, likely, not 100%, likely, there's no exhaust down in that basement area, right? So think about true basements, cellar, underground, small windows, and none of those have really gone yet, or they're exhausting, but here's my air inlet coming in from that front door. That's the type of basement fire that we've been to, where we make the push down the cellar stairs and we put the fire out. It's not pretty. We don't enjoy it, but we make it happen. The final scenario is I open up that front door, I get floor to ceiling smoke, and it's pumping out towards me, and there is no air inlet on the bottom. Most likely, and you brought up this fire before we got on, that's going to be our low inlet, high exhaust, where this is 100% of an exhaust, meaning flow path, exhaust, whatever you want to call it. This is the one that is going to be, I don't want to say impossible, but it will be very, very difficult to push down those basement stairs. And this is the one where you probably want to go around the rear. You might have to put the line through the window. You might have to do something to cool it down before we make those basement stairs, if that's the only way to get down there. Because not only are we in the exhaust flow path, but there's an inlet somewhere else that's feeding it. Now, as I put in the article, the one caveat to all this is the W word, wind, right? So if we have a wind condition, I could have a fire on the first floor. I could open up that front door, get zero smoke, and yet not have a fire above me. It could be on that level because the wind is at my back, blowing in that front door and blowing the fire out the rear, or vice versa. I could open up that front door, have floor to ceiling smoke, and no basement fire. But what's happening is the wind is blowing at the back of the structure, and now I created the opening at the front to blow it out. So, there should be some other clues there. The smoke should be coming out horizontally and not out and up like we would expect. If on arrival, I can't see the building and I just see smoke, again, or the streets banked down, one of those things, that's a decent indicator that there may be wind impacting this fire as well. But those are some of the kind of tricks that we want to use in conjunction with everything else, right? So again, just like we don't use the camera by itself, we don't use our eyes by themselves, right? So I could get off the rig and say, hey, I have heavy smoke showing, but what does it smell like, right? Does it smell like a burnt food on the stove, or does it smell like, hey, we got real work here? So,
yeah, I really liked your part about the flow path, and how important is it to understand the flow path, not only identify it, but also somewhat control it. We go into these situations where you like to think that we can control everything. We know in the fire business that's not 100% a given or an absolute, but talk about, and we'll bring up a fire later that we'll talk about this philosophy, that we're going to hint on. But how important is it that that flow path doesn't change for a basement fire when you crawl into it? You go in that front door, you see that you're going in, you're crawling in the intake, the out is above you, so you got a bidirectional flow path. How important is it that it stays that way when you're going down into that chimney?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you're starting to if you're starting to make the descent down those stairs or in through that first floor and it's tolerable, and then a window I say taken, but a window could fail and that changes. And now you get that low inlet, high exhaust. So let's talk about low inlet, high exhaust. And that's basically saying that, hey, the front door's open. So that's your exhaust port for the basement fire. And if you get an opening in the basement level, generally it's a walkout basement, but not always. But if you get that opening in the lower level, a lot of times that lower portion becomes 100% of an inlet feeding the fire. And now that front door becomes 100% of an exhaust of that flow path. I'm not saying it's never been done, but all of the studies, and there are plenty of line of duty deaths to point to where this was not a survivable condition for civilians or firefighters alike. And this does not just have to be a basement fire. I'll talk about another fire also. But anywhere that you have a low inlet and a high exhaust, that's a very deadly condition if we are trying to attempt to extinguish that fire from the top down. And that's where a lot of the studies have shown that, like it or not, and I understand we need to protect the primary means of egress, getting water on the fire from around the side or the rear may be the best option. Again, I'm not saying it always is. And there are times where we can't get around the rear or we can't get to the side or it's fortified, but it needs to at least be kept in mind. Now, if you're going to be going in the front door, and you're going to be doing it, you're going in the front door, you're finding the basement stairs and you're going down those. One of the things that I don't like that's been talked about a lot is saying, all right, well, once you get to the bottom of the stairs, you're good, right? All right, you come down the chimney, it's going to suck, but as soon as you get to the bottom of the stairs, you're good, you're going to feel that relief. First of all, you're not ever going to feel relief until we put the fire out and ventilate, which brings up the other avenue that just putting the fire out is not even going to make conditions all that much better. It's going to be the ventilation in conjunction with the extinguishment of the fire that's going to make things better. We need to get the cool air in there and get the smoke out. We don't just need to put the fire out. And that's where, the UL studies have transitioned to so much better of explaining that it's not just getting water under the fire, but it's also replacing the bad environment with the good environment from outside. But also, as we're in that chimney, as we're in that flow path, it's not just that we get to the bottom of the stairs, but also that we get out of the flow path. So, for example, if I go down to the bottom of the stairs and the fire is burning to the right of me, if I go down to the right, I'm not going to feel any relief. I'm still in that flow path. I need to go down and to the left to be out of that flow path and feel some of that relief. And think of the flow path as just getting punched in the gut, right? That's what it is. It's not the temperature, because I guarantee you the temperature in the flow path and out of the flow path, it's different, but it's not like, oh, if you're out of the flow path, suddenly you're in 70-degree room temperature. It's the fact that you're getting punched repeatedly by that flow path that your gear is going to end up getting saturated. And that's when you're going to get burned. And so it's important to understand how our gear works as well. And that I could go on tangents for hours about all of this stuff, but it all ties together. And that's the important thing to remember too, is how it all ties together in the end.
Yeah, the incident I was hinting at was obviously Cherry Road. It was the one, when this first came out with the whole flow path, trying to understand it, 10, 15 years ago, that really put it in perspective for me. Was, okay, the bidirectional changed because the low inlet was created by a truck company, that opened up the slider, the window, and all of a sudden you've got a low intake, and, the crew, their hose crew crawling in is now not in an intake, but they're actually in the flow path. And the heat and the energy that you were talking about became unbearable, and unfortunately caused 2 line of duty deaths. But like I said, if you want to understand flow path, that's the one case study that I always go back to with the NIOSH line of duty deaths to really truly understand what exactly we're talking about. But it doesn't have to happen in the basement, like you said. But
Yeah, so the one incident that I talk about is I'll pull up the info, and there's some excellent resources on it. The ATF, in addition to the NIOSH report, the ATF did like what do they call it? Like a simulation of it.
Simulation, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they did one of those on there, and it just really hits home all this stuff because it was a garden style apartment, and I forget.
It's Baltimore County.
Yeah, Baltimore County. It starts.
Yeah.
I knew I had the name in my head, but unless you have that name in front of you, it's hard to pronounce.
Yeah, I've watched and studied that fire several times. Yeah.
So I always, a lot of classes we use it for, and there's not every department that has garden style apartments. And so I understand that. But the reality is if you take out the top floor and you look at it, it looks like a raised ranch, right? The difference in this case is that obviously it's an apartment building. So you have apartment doors and stuff like that, but they actually got the basement fire knocked down. And this goes into too, go on this kind of discussion is what do we call everything, right? So when I do tactic classes, and for those that I think most know what a raised ranch is, but it's basically where the front door is in the center, and then there's a half landing down and a half landing up. And, by all accounts, it's a 2-story structure or 2 levels, I should say, not 2 stories, 2-level structure. But I always ask, like, okay, I'll put a fire on the lower level. I'll say, what do you call this? And some people call it a basement. Some people call it the first floor. Some people call it, I don't think cellar too much, but, and then I'll put it up on the upper level. What do you call this? And just as many people call that the first floor as the second floor. And I say, okay, well, I don't care if you call it the 14th floor, but if half of you are calling the first floor the lower level and half of you are calling the upper floor the first level, we have a major issue here. And that in the city was a big issue with brownstone type buildings where that ground level was being called a basement. It was being called a first floor. It was being called a ground level. And most people think of basements as, okay, I go in the first floor and go down. And so that created some confusion as well, because the same structure had a level called a basement and had a level called a cellar in it, but they were two different levels, right? So I'm not telling anybody what to call the structures or levels, but make sure you're all on the same page with it. Right?
So in the Midwest here, we call those split levels, but our ambulance crews call them horrible because they're terrible.
Yeah, exactly.
Another fire, to your point, Dan, that matches up really well with the Mark Falkenhand situation that is, and it just came to me a few minutes ago when I looked it up again because I couldn't remember exactly where it was, but it was in Prince George's County in 2016 maybe, or 2012. 2012, the 57th Avenue fire. Okay. It was a single family dwelling, wind driven from the basement, and the outlet was up high once they got the door open, and created similar conditions.
Yeah, and so the Falkenhand fire, they had a basement fire, and it was called the terrace level, but it was a basement. They couldn't put it out initially with the line in the front door because they created a low inlet, high exhaust. They ended up putting a line into the front windows, knocked it down, went in, knocked the basement down, or terrace level, all's well and good. They had auto exposure in the rear, and then it created a low inlet, high exhaust from the second floor to the third floor, which ended up killing him and causing someone else to bail out. The other interesting thing with that fire is there were multiple successful rescues made. And the first, for the low inlet, high exhaust, a lot of people think of low inlet, high exhaust as, okay, I go in the front door, and then as I'm going down, like you said before, someone takes the rear slider or whatever. In this case, the first thing that was done was the third floor front window from a VES rescue. And then the last thing that ended up coming into play was, open doors within from the apartments. And so there was just a lot of, I say good, but a lot of good fire dynamic lessons, and just in general searching without a hose line lessons, which is one of the main classes we do, is searching without a hose line, and just talking about isolating yourself and controlling doors behind you. But just, really good lessons to learn. And another is, we were talking about it before, for my job, the Timothy Klein fire, that involved wind, an open slider. And that really demonstrates the flow path, because Timothy Klein was killed. He was in the flow path, he got caught and he was killed. Whereas guys on the same level as him, a few feet away, were spared because they were not in the flow path, even though they were on the same floor or close to the same floor. And so, again, just hopefully lessons that can be learned so that we can all, be successful in the future.
Yeah, there's no shortage of lessons out there. We just have to pay attention to them and get out of it. Now, you mentioned a little bit about the Timothy Klein fire and how that was a line of duty that was basement related, but just kind of talk about how that flow path moved throughout that building and how to identify those conditions.
Well, that goes back to, again, there was a lot of things that happened. I don't want to say outside of our control, but street issues, apparatus placement issues, which did not help. I believe an engine company was not there. There was a mechanical issue that they were not able to go into pumps, and so delayed water on the fire. And they actually believe that the fire that dropped down to the basement, so it did not initially start in the basement. But wind, so that area, again, a two-story private dwelling, if you consider it that. It's called a Canarsie tenement. I don't have much experience in that area, but the slider failing or being opened, I believe it failed, and wind coming off of the bay there just took a small fire in the basement while crews had knocked down the main fire above and just blew it throughout the structure, basically. So, they were caught above, not on the first floor. I believe Timothy Klein was on the top floor, and, just, again, caught in the flow path, whereas other guys were near the window. They were able to, get out, or guys that were on the floor. And again, I was not at the fire, so I'm talking from reading reports, were able to at least, we'll call it, horizontally bail out into areas that were out of the flow path. And again, you have very experienced firemen there, very experienced companies, and just how quickly they talked about it happening is very humbling to know that they were forced to make split-second decisions, and didn't see any of it coming because of how quickly this can happen. Now, would it have happened without wind? Potentially, but the wind has to be something that we respect, if you will, or are aware of, and understanding how we need to modify our tactics if wind, whether it be at a private dwelling or a 40-story building, is suspected.
One of the problems we have here, and I'm sure it's all over the country, is renovation. People love to renovate these basements. Mm-hmm. They do it without, and Jason's going to get all jacked up because he's a code and ordinance guy. He's a recovering fire marshal. But the thing is that people will do it without codes. They'll do, they won't get permits, etc. And we've seen where that causes all kind of problems. And the reason why those ordinances are out there are for us, right? So you went into a thing about compartmentation, which is really, I think, important. We just had a Mayday in our area a month ago from a basement fire. Luckily, it was just a quick Mayday. People got oriented and we were able to get the member out. I wasn't there. I listened. I watched reports. I talked to our first couple of our captains who were on the scene and listened. And really what they thought, they had knocked down a fire but they didn't find the fire because it was compartmentalized because of this, what we do in these basements. And before you knew it, you thought you had the fire knocked out, and you go into a full, rapid fire event. Kind of talk about, you did hint about compartmentalization.
Yeah, I know. I can't say it either.
So. I know. I talk too fast, and next thing you know, I got issues. But.
I thought ordinances were for tax dollars, but I guess I had my bearings wrong. So compartmentalized. Obviously, we know that all of the stuff that we're putting in our homes now require oxygen. If they're going to burn, they require oxygen. We very quickly use up the available oxygen. We create very thick smoke. And in these smaller areas, there's going to be less oxygen available, obviously. And so it's going to make our fires significantly smokier and have the heat and have the fuel, whether that be the smoke or the actual objects themselves. And then when we start venting or we open up or windows fail, then it's going to allow those fires to take off significantly. Now, when we talk about compartmentalization as well, we also have to look into that ceiling above us. And so one of the big things, and you talk about maydays, and in your case, the mayday sounded like it was from the fire vent. But one of the things we alluded to, and one of the things I definitely want to talk about, is our localized or structural collapse of these first floors. And whether we call them basement ceilings or first floors, we're talking about the same structure. We have to understand how they're built and what's up there. And the reality is we're not going to know on scene, right? Because very rarely are we going to be able to walk in, poke a hole in the ceiling, and have good visibility to be able to say, oh, okay, this is built with 2x6s, or this is built with this, truss system, or whatever the case may be. The only avenue we might have there is if we have similar structures in line, and we can send someone into an adjoining structure to take a look. But even in that case, how much manpower do we have to go waste time doing that? So understanding if we have a finished basement or not, I think, is very important, because a lot of the studies have shown is that the sheetrock that a finished basement has provides a significant amount of structural protection from those joists. And even if it almost seemed like from the studies that I would rather have a finished basement, so sheetrock with truss above me, than a unfinished basement with standard joists above me. I think a lot of the studies were showing that sheetrock protected the floor members or structural members significantly greater amount of time than good old legacy wood, but with no protection on there. In terms of voids as well, we need to understand that a lot of basements or cellars have drop ceilings in them. It's a cheap, inexpensive way to finish a basement rather than putting sheetrock and painting and all that. And a lot of basements have a lot of HVAC running in there. So it's a good way, rather than having to box out HVAC, you can just put a drop ceiling down there to make it look like a finished basement, even though, and it is a finished basement, but it's a less expensive version of a finished basement. Drop ceilings, to me, are one of the more dangerous things that we face, and not necessarily because if a drop ceiling falls on me, it's going to kill me, but it will entangle me. It will probably, scare me, and you'll have to disentangle yourself. It can also hide a lot of fire up there. So if you're not checking above drop ceilings, you run that risk of getting caught by fire there. And so if you run into a drop ceiling, just make sure that you're moving those tiles, seeing what's going on above there, and, being prepared that if it falls on you, it's probably not going to kill you. It's probably not going to knock you out, but it'll certainly disorient you and potentially require that you disentangle yourself utilizing cutters or other avenues. And so then, running out of air and those types of things become a major issue. And so, not to go on too many tangents, but if a drop ceiling falls on you, that's a mayday. It doesn't matter if, you know where you are and you're able to get out. If you're starting to get entangled on that, that could definitely slow you down significantly. So
I think we've covered the bulk of the material in here. You talk about the reconstruction, you talk about the void spaces. The one thing we'll end on is you do mention, some proactive RIT that can be addressed and considered
Yeah.
at the beginning of the incident, and then we'll close it out after that, because I think you make some really good points about that, during and after the size up.
Yeah, so a lot of people, and there's ad nauseum articles out there about proactive RIT. So I'll keep it, kind of short and sweet to basement fires. I know we talk a lot about, what can RIT do? They throw ladders, that type of stuff, softening the building, whatever that means. But when it comes to any fire, I want to know the lowest level that it's burning on. And I can look at many fires, not even close calls, line of duty deaths, but just, stubborn. These are annoying fires that continue to burn. And a lot of times it was because they were getting fed from below. And so, we can have a first floor fire. I look at a fire when I was a volunteer, and we were fighting it on the first floor, the second floor, the attic. And in the end, it started in the basement, and it wasn't a dangerous fire in the basement, I'll call it, meaning, it wasn't like burning away structural members and whatnot. But either it dropped down or at some point it was in the basement, and it was continuing to feed everything above it. And so from a RIT scenario, I don't care where the fire is. If we're talking about a fourth floor fire, a second floor fire, a first floor fire, I want to get eyes on the basement. I want to make sure that it is not burning below where our members think that it's burning, and not just from the standpoint of is it burning below, but structural stability as well. So we could have a first floor fire, first floor all day long, but now we have hoarding conditions. Now we're putting a lot of heavy guys on it. Now we're putting a lot of manpower and water into the structure. Can I get below into that basement, open up the ceiling a little bit, and make sure that my joists aren't sagging or anything like that? And to the point, I know you'll get, well, you can't go in the structure. And I think, from RIT standpoint, it's more we don't want them operating in the IDLH. And so if we're in the basement and it's clear, then we can maybe take care of utilities. We can, which is certainly something that could save a fireman's life later point. We can check for any fire in the basement, whether it be in the basement or up in the ceiling of the basement. We can check for any signs of obvious structural stability issues. And as long as I'm not on air, I can very easily respond to any mayday that may come up at some point. And so to me, that's one of the first things I ask when we're the RIT team or the fast truck, I ask them to do is, all right, let's get eyes below wherever these guys are operating and make sure that there's not fire burning below them. In addition to all of the other things, throwing ladders, taking window bars, any of those types of things. But again, things that we can do to make things safer so that we don't end up with that mayday, to me, is an important aspect of that RIT team. And it's not going to be the same at every fire. And that's why, we get very much into the automatic of, all right, let me just bring my shepherd's hook and stand in front ready to go. But we need to have a little bit more of a proactive, and I hate using the terminology that everyone uses, proactive approach. What does that actually mean? In a basement fire and a first floor fire, that's what it means to me, making sure fire's not burning below where members are operating and potentially checking for structural stability issues. Because again, we train RIT all the time of firefighter through the floor. What does that actually mean? Well, if we can determine that there's fire below them, maybe we won't have a fireman through the floor every time.
That's a great point. I think if you ask any firefighter, what's their biggest fear when going through a building? And I would tell you, you're going to get running out of air. You're going to get malfunctions or getting caught in a flashover. I would tell you probably more of the time that you're going to get falling through a floor. I mean, that's the big one. It's like, God, I hope this floor is good below me, And your article brings up great points in the fact that even though you can conclude a great 360, you can get around the structure, you can take a look. There's sometimes you just can't tell because of these vent limited fires, so how important is it to sound that floor when you go in through the front door? I've seen some of I've had those when I was a battalion chief. I had a company go in, almost fall through a floor. Fire had been burning for 4 hours and it just smoldered. Yeah. And they did a quick hit. And, these terrazzos and these planks that hold together, it's amazing how much fire can be below them and they still hold just that little bit there. And you don't know it. And the next thing you know, it's just gone. Yeah, totally. Go ahead.
And even and you brought up a couple things. Even sounding the floor is showing to be not that it's not effective, but it's not a good hint of what's going on below you, which again requires the RIT team or somebody. I shouldn't say RIT team, but requires somebody to get into that basement and see what's going on above them. And then there's a lot of about the thermal imaging camera. If I go in the front door and shine it down at the floors, that can show me what's going on below me. And you'll see some posts showing some, all right, well, you can see the heat of the nails or whatever. In the end, it's still not an effective, 100% effective tool to see what's going on below you. Someone needs to get down there. And guess what? If you have fire on the first floor, I think I might have put analysis or paralysis through analysis in there. We can't guess forever. At some point where we can't size up forever, at some point we just have to make a decision and go with it. And again, that's where it comes to play. I'm not going to fault the first due company for having fire on the first floor and stretching into the first floor. But at some point, someone needs to get into that basement and make sure that it did not drop down into the basement or did not start in the basement and work its way up. And it doesn't need to be a room and contents fire in the basement. It can be, a gas line burning in the void area of that first floor. That's probably the most dangerous type of incident or fire because you're not going to have visible fire in the basement, but you do have fire burning directly against those structural members in that first floor void area. So just making sure that somebody really, really, really investigates that basement. And that could be the safety officer. Maybe it's not the RIT team fast truck. Maybe it's a safety officer. But guess what? If they have to go on air to get in that basement, I'm betting my bottom dollar that there's some sort of fire in that basement as well. So,
great stuff. Yeah, you talk about the void space. I think about CSST, right?
You know what? I couldn't think of the acronym off the top of my head, but that's exactly what it is. One of my guys put together a phenomenal McMansion class, and they talk about CSST a lot, and that's caused line of duty deaths before. Yeah. And not that caused it, but that started a fire that caused structural collapse. I don't even know if you call it structural collapse or a localized collapse that killed firemen. So there's a lot of hazards in there, but if we can at least determine that the fire is in the basement, I think a lot of things start to piece themselves together a lot more effectively than if we're guessing.
Right. All right. Anything to finish up with or about that 50-minute mark?
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate you guys having me. It's good to sometimes, as effective as an article can be, it's good to sometimes be able to have a couple other guys to bounce things off of and be able to put some of your thoughts into, audible words versus just typing. But I think, I don't obviously basement fires are not going away. I think we've gotten a lot more effective in fighting them for the most part, tactically. And so again, my article was more about just recognizing that it's in the basement and less about, all right, where's the first line going? Where's the first search team going? Those types of things.
I thought it was excellent stuff. Thanks for writing it. Thanks for coming on and talking about it.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
A lot of good learning points in the article. That's what a lot of good fire engineering articles have, but I can honestly say that this one has a ton of takeaways. So if you get your hands on the June 2025 fire engineering, make sure you get into Dan's article. It's in the basement. There it is. I would try to pull it up on the screen, but I would screw it up. So Jason, that's just the way to do it. Thank you.
Cool.
Dan, tell us a little bit. What do you got coming up? You got any engagements?
Well, I'm working on a search rope article for fire engineering. Hopefully that'll come out. That's something that I think, everyone has one or a lot have them, and it's not really talked about. Or what are we actually using it for? And again, a lot of proactive stuff that search rope can be used for. I do have a good amount of hands-on training and lectures coming up. We do the South Windsor Rescue Weekend in September. We did the Metro Boston Fire Conference this past spring, and I'm doing a fair share of open enrollment, first due kind of, I don't want to, I use the word collapse, but it's meant for car into a building, tree on a house, the things that we're actually going to every day. And then we do a good amount at Joey D, the Joey D seminar. I don't know if you've heard about that out New York area. So we do a fire behavior class there, and we're doing a car into a structure class there as well. So if you haven't, if guys watching it, that is traveled from far and wide. You'll get people from Honolulu, California, everywhere. So that's a very popular conference. And that all goes back to Joey DiBernardo, Black Sunday in New York City, where he was forced to bail out of a window. Multiple firefighters were forced to bail out of a window. And, it's Black Sunday, not just because of that fire, but because of the Scalfani fire in Brooklyn, which I guess ironically enough was a basement fire. And, he was caught in a coat rack on the stairs, the half landing stairs from the first floor to the basement. And, that was a very in-depth and difficult removal. And unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries. So that's where Black Sunday comes from. And so this seminar is done in memory of them. And the training there is top notch. There's so many instructors from all walks of life. And it's a good weekend. So at the first weekend of June, I believe, or second, I guess, because Halloween. So 7th, 8th, that area. Yeah.
Outstanding.
Cool.
All right. Well, Jason, you want to take us home?
All right. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in. And obviously, if you don't have a subscription, get one, because you're missing out on content like that article, like Dan's article in the basement. And it's packed full of those things, and the one he's working on presently. Look for Dan's classes. Do you have a company website that they can get a hold of you at?
Yeah, flashfire.com, flashfireindustries.com. So.
There you go. So if you need something, or you have questions, or need some help with something, let him know. Get a hold of him. Registration for FDIC is just around the corner. Should be getting notices of chosen classes very soon. But as you all know, that opens up, and once it seems like registration opens up, it comes so fast. It just boom. The hot classes typically sell out, so you want to get registered early. And look forward to seeing everybody. And thanks for tuning in. And look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, Dan.
All right.
Stay safe.